like individuals and couples.
Mhm.
And with that particular conversation, I kind of wanted to, I guess, just kind of dive right on in and ask you just some particular things, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so when it comes to like infidelity, I guess in relationships, is it is it possible for a relationship to survive infidelity?
Yeah, it is absolutely possible for a relationship to survive infidelity. It takes a certain process in order to do that, but I have worked with many couples who come into the office. I mean, it's one of the most common reasons that people come into the office for couples therapy, and if they're both willing to truly work on it, if they both are committed to wanting to make the relationship work, then people can absolutely overcome infidelity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even with like, I guess surviving that whole infidelity, like what do you advise? Like, is there like specific steps that you kind of advise your patients, your clients, like to try to, I guess, ease some of the tension with trying to get past some of the stuff that's happening? Like, what do you usually tell your clients and stuff?
So I usually use a three-step process to helping clients work through infidelity, and they all start with the letter A. So
Okay.
the first stage is atonement.
Okay.
And it's the most important stage because you cannot get to the other things. And a lot of the time when I'm working with couples, one or both people will be so eager to get past that uncomfortable stage. They
Yeah.
want to get to the other place where it feels good, um, that they kind of accidentally skip over doing a real atonement process. And just like it sounds, it's a process where the person who um, we call them relational norm violations. So
Yeah.
they violated the norm in the relationship by having an affair, or there's other forms of infidelity, right? Like
Yeah.
spending money they weren't supposed to, being somewhere that they had lied about, whatever it is. Um, and they have to really apologize for that wholeheartedly. And I work with so many people who say, but I've apologized a million times.
Yeah.
I'm ready for this to be over with. Are they ever going to forgive me? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And what I usually say is if you feel like you've apologized a million times, but it's not getting anywhere, it's probably because you haven't apologized in the way the other person needs it.
Okay.
And sometimes we say, I'm sorry, but we don't really give information about what we're sorry about. We don't really explain what we know that we need to do differently or why it happened. And so in atonement, the partner needs to really say, not only I'm sorry, but I'm sorry because I know this is what it did to you. I can empathize with you. And I also understand myself now, and I know how I'm going to prevent this in the future.
Yeah.
Those are really important parts of that process. Another really important part is for the other person to be able to talk about how much pain it caused for them and to have their partner actually listen. That is really hard. When you are the one who betrayed, it can feel so incredibly frustrating. It can feel shameful to have to sit and listen to it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I guess you can even imagine what that would feel like, right? To be
Yeah.
like, "I've
Mhm.
listened to this. I already feel bad enough. I don't wanna listen to it again."
Yeah.
But being able to listen to it is almost like you are deflating an overfilled balloon, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
every time you listen, you let that person get more and more air out. And
Yeah.
every time you listen and validate instead of push it away, they start to feel safe with you again.
Okay.
The interesting thing is that the more you listen, the less it's gonna happen, and
Okay.
the less you listen, the more your partner is gonna keep trying to talk about it.
Okay.
So, that's the first part of the process.
Yeah.
On the end of the person who's been betrayed, they really need to be able also to know what they want their partner to do to be in their good graces again, and they can't always move the goalpost. So I always say, like, you have to be clear about how the person that betrayed you can get out of debt.
Yeah.
if you're not clear and they don't know what to do, or if you say this is what you can do and they do it and you don't accept that, then you're both not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
The second phase is attunement. So that's tuning in with each other again. That's figuring out, like, where did things go wrong in our relationship? How can we connect again? What do we need to know about each other that maybe we weren't sharing in the past? And then the third stage is attachment. So that's where you start to feel committed and secure and connected.
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to talk about it less and you're going to feel more relieved. And it's not going to feel like the old relationship, but
Yeah.
it will feel like something new and something safe.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense?
So yeah. So even with, I guess, those three stages, I guess you also encourage your patients, your clients to actually, I guess, be a little bit patient in that process too, right? Because it's not like that's an overnight type
Yes, I'm
situation.
really glad you pointed that out. Patience is so important in this process. And as I mentioned, a lot of times the partner who feels the guilt and the shame obviously wants to get out of that feeling, because that's guilt and shame are like the worst human emotions that we feel, right? They're just terrible. So
Mhm.
sometimes that will cause them to be impatient and they'll say things that actually take them backwards.
Yeah.
So they'll say, when are you going to get over this? We've
Yeah.
already talked about this 80 times.
Yeah.
How much longer am I going to have to do this for? Uh, Are you always going to be upset about this? And every time that you say something like that, you disrupt the process because you're actually telling the other person, I'm over it already. I can't be with you in your pain anymore.
Yeah.
And so a partner who can be patient and say, let's talk about it again. I'm going to give you as much space as you need to explore this. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
That moves the process forward much better than if you're trying to push it along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing. That's kind of what I found about, I guess, the situations when it involves like any type of emotional infidelity or physical infidelity or any number of infidelities,
Yeah.
is that like that giving that person space to kind of, I guess, reconcile a lot of those things and try to get back to where they were is like the hardest thing for individuals to do sometimes.
It's really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
And it's very painful. It's
Yeah.
incredibly painful. And couples who work through infidelity, they both are feeling a significant amount of pain. And I think sometimes we forget, we know that the person who's been betrayed is
Yeah.
feeling pain, but the partner who betrayed is often feeling a lot of pain. I mean, that's not across the board. There are, of course, instances where they don't feel remorse and all of that. And that's a case where you aren't going to move past the atonement phase. But a partner who really feels remorse and is really connected, they are feeling pain too. They're feeling pained that they hurt their partner. They're feeling pained that sometimes they're grieving.
Yeah.
Um, the whatever it was that they were doing. And that's a hard thing to talk about sometimes, is
Yeah.
that even though they want to be with their partner, there might be things that they miss about what they were doing outside of the relationship. Um, and then it's painful to have to look at yourself and your shame and your guilt. So there is a lot of pain throughout infidelity counseling that both
Yeah.
people experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, like, I guess, communication in marriage, so the first few years, I guess, to me, I think are the most critical when it comes to like building that foundation of communication. So when it comes to like building that foundation, how important do you think that it is for, like, especially in those first years, for couples to kind of really just focus on talking and actually getting to know each other?
It's incredibly important. Like you said, it's the foundation,
Mhm.
and there's so much that we do in the beginning that becomes habit later on,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
I call, at the beginning of our relationship, we create something that I call covert contracts.
Okay.
We don't say them out loud, but we essentially agree to accept certain types of behavior, to avoid talking about certain things,
Yeah.
um, to live in a certain way. So, an example of that might be like, we both don't really ask each other how we're feeling.
Yeah.
We stay away from that, but we've never said it out loud, but we know that that's kind of how we operate, is that if somebody's upset, we just don't go there.
Yeah.
Or we don't really talk about money, or this person is the one that makes all the decisions and I just go along with it. And then
Yeah.
what happens is that later on, because you didn't talk about what you actually wanted this relationship to be like, you've accidentally agreed to behave and interact and to do certain things in the relationship. And down the road, when all of those hormones are gone and it starts to feel like real life, people
Yeah.
start to think, oh my gosh, like this isn't, I don't like this. I don't want to be acting this way. And then they start to argue because they say, well, I've always wanted someone that talks about their emotions and you never do that. But the thing is that in the beginning, there was a quiet agreement to not talk about feelings.
Yeah.
And so when you're at the start, you want to really try to explore things, to let the other person know how you want the relationship to go, to be curious with them, to try to talk out loud about what you think the dynamic is and what you want it to be, because it is harder to break those habits down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like even with I guess building that foundation of communication, again, that's like a I guess a ongoing process. So I think to a point, I think that most people when they hit a roadblock with their partner and they feel like their partner shuts down to a certain extent, I think that that's when that communication kind of stops to a certain extent. So when
Yeah.
it comes to like those particular types of barriers, like do you encourage your patients to kind of just keep pushing forward or just kind of wait on their partner to open up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when people hit a roadblock, like you said, you're so right. What will often happen is that their dynamics start to play out.
Yeah.
So, in the beginning, everything is sunshine and rainbows. You get along about everything.
Yeah.
Then you hit stress. And what happens is that both people start responding to that stress in their own personal way that they respond to stress.
Yeah.
And some people respond to stress by shutting down.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to look at that. Like you could call it avoidant, you could look at attachment styles, you can call it pursuer distancer dynamic. There's all sorts of things you could call it, but essentially, in the face of stress, one person is like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm not
Mhm.
there. And the
Yeah.
other person in the face of stress gets activated and they're
Yeah.
like, I want to talk about it. I want to solve it. I want to figure it out.
Yeah.
So you get into a pursuer distancer dynamic
Yeah.
and you asked what is the best thing to like let the person be. The best thing is to figure out how you can do the dance together. So if your partner is being quiet, usually there's a few underlying reasons. And if it's a good relationship, it's actually usually relationship protective, which means that they're afraid if they talk about it, that there's going to be a fight, that it's going to get worse, that it's not going to be helpful. And sometimes they're physiologically flooded, which means that their body is actually kind of shut down in a way to not talk about it. The more you pursue, the more you're adding to that flooding that they're feeling.
Yeah.
And it actually starts to feel like a threat, not consciously, but their body feels threatened by it. And
Yeah.
when that happens, your heart rate increases, hormones are released into the brain, and it shuts off your verbal reasoning sections. So
Yeah.
the only thing you can access is your amphibian brain, which means you can't really talk about things. So if the person who is feeling really activated is able to say, I'm going to give you a second to think about it, but we do need to talk about it at some point and step away, then that can often help that person to self soothe and then come back. Now, for it to be a healthy relationship, the person that distances needs to take responsibility to self-soothe and to come into the conversation.
Yeah.
If they refuse to do that, then you can't move forward in your relationship. So there's responsibility on both ends.
Yeah. So even when it comes to like couples and couples counseling, when a couple decides to seek couples counseling, and I guess that one party wants to seek it, the other party is on the fence to a certain extent, can couples counseling actually work if the other party is like, I don't know about going to a counselor? Like,
Yes, if they're on the fence, but not if they're off the fence.
yeah.
So we
Yeah.
see people in 3 levels of commitment.
Uh-huh.
One is when both people are committed,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Actually, it's 4. One is when both people are committed. One is where there's commitment, but there's iffiness.
Yeah.
Like, they're definitely not saying it's totally over. They're open to discussion, but they've started thinking other options.
Yeah.
The third is where someone is super committed and the other person isn't at all. Like, they're not even iffy. And
Yeah.
I have people come into the office where I say, "What's your level of commitment?" And one person says, "I'm here so you can help us get divorced." And the other person says, "I'm here so you can keep us married."
Yeah.
And then the fourth is when both people aren't committed. And I see people that come in and they both say, "We're here as a last ditch effort, but honestly, we mostly just want help getting divorced." Um, so yeah, people come in at all different levels of commitment. What I would say is that the on the fence people, sometimes with couples counseling, move towards the relationship. Um, but there's also moments where people decide through counseling to split. And that's not necessarily a failure. That can be a really good thing for
Yeah.
both people. And it can be a good way to do it
Yeah.
because you're doing it in a way that's respectful and kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So earlier in the conversation, we were talking about infidelity.
Yeah.
So when you go with an emotional infidelity versus a physical infidelity, it's almost like which one is worse, right? Like, is it like emotionally cheating on someone or physically cheating on someone? Like, is that like one and the same?
It's a really interesting question, and it's interesting to see how different people react,
Yeah.
right? And so there's no one answer. It really depends on that person.
Yeah.
So some people will come in and say, "The part that bothers me is that the 2 of you said you love each other.
Yeah.
I don't actually care too much that you had sex. Something about that doesn't bother me, but it is very wounding that you said you love each other."
Yeah.
And then other people will come in and say, "I can handle the fact that you said you loved them, and that I can process, but I can't get past that you had sex.
Yeah.
And I keep envisioning it, and I don't know if I can have sex with you again." So it depends on the person. And of course, there's reasons for that, right? Like,
Yeah.
where is their own personal wounding, insecurity? What has that relationship been like in general? Like, was there criticism around intimacy and sex prior to this happening? So now the person feels even more insecure.
Yeah.
But it's very dependent on the person.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to me, and I guess from my experience, I think that generally most people see that as one and the same because you basically lose trust for that person when they do either version of that. Like either they don't really sleep with the person, but they just confide in the person, or they actually sleep with the person. You still lose that same level of trust for that person, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's no, the thing that was done is just a catalyst to losing trust.
Yeah.
And when you lose trust, you lose safety,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So emotional, physical, again, any other type of betrayal, it's this deep sense of, you are supposed to be my person.
Yeah.
And the thing that you did makes me second guess whether you are.
Yeah.
And it makes me second guess how safe I've been all along, which
Yeah.
is very painful.
Yeah.
Not even will I be safe in the future. It's also I my reality has been shaken
Yeah.
because I thought I was really safe with you.
Yeah.
I thought we were committed. And now I look back and every interaction that we had, I know it wasn't with my full understanding of what you were doing.
Yeah.
And that warps my sense of reality. I don't know when you're being honest and when you're not. And that is often the biggest issue here.
Yeah.
I don't know what was real in the past. And so I don't know how to know what's real in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess in some of the most severe cases, have you seen that there is a way back, right? Like a way back from something like that. In severe cases, have you seen that there might be a way back?
Like if there's like chronic
Yeah.
betrayal or something like that.
Yeah.
So if one of the most important things is that when people are moving forward, that in that moving forward process, there's nothing else to discover, that
Yeah.
they get to a point where they feel like they've learned it all
Yeah.
and nothing else is popping up unexpectedly. When things continue to pop up, so new information becomes evident, you find out that they're having another affair, you find out that there was someone else that they never mentioned, that's hard to come back from. So the level of infidelity, like prior to the healing process, doesn't always direct whether it's going to heal or not. It's during the healing process, does more information keep coming up?
Yeah.
And is the other partner transparent?
Yeah.
Or is the person that was betrayed constantly coming along landmines?
Yeah.
When that happens, it's pretty hard to come back from it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk compromise.
Yeah.
So when it comes to compromise in relationships and compromising on specific topics in relationships, sometimes I think that couples have that hard idea of what to compromise on. Like what is compromise? So how important is finding common ground with this compromise in relationships to you?
It's incredibly important. I think that a lot of people hear the word compromise
Yeah.
and what they think of is win-lose agreements.
Yeah.
They think of I'm having to compromise my own needs, my own values, and it's gonna not feel good. It's gonna be me losing and the other person winning, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to couples, I talk to them about how we're often trained to create win-lose agreements,
Yeah.
but that when you're in a healthy relationship, you can find ways to create win-wins. And we can call them win-win compromises, we can call them win-win agreements,
Yeah.
but that at the end of the day, we have to figure out in these important moments, how do we make decisions that don't violate either of us? It might mean that one person gets what they want and that we give up what we want because that isn't really a violation of us. It's not
Yeah.
that important, right? Like if I'm having, let's say my husband and I are getting married and it's super important to me to have a big wedding. He thought he would have a small wedding, but it's not that important. He might say, okay, have a big wedding because
Yeah.
that's your core need. But here are some core needs I have about the wedding. And I would have to be willing to be flexible with him on those.
Yeah.
So it's being able to navigate how do we make agreements that don't ask anybody to lose themselves or to violate
Yeah.
themselves? It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're never flexible. It doesn't mean that there aren't some times where you're gonna say, sure, you get what you want. I'm okay with it. I don't really need what I want. It means that at the core of it, though, you don't feel violated throughout your compromises.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that would boil down to like belief system to a certain extent. Like you don't want to compromise something that you deeply believe in to a certain extent. Like,
Yes.
because once you
Yeah.
start, I guess, poking with your belief system, then it kind of, steers you in the other direction to a certain extent.
Exactly. So like your core beliefs, your core values,
Yeah.
those are what should be steering your compromise conversations.
Yeah.
Um, and I utilize Gottman method therapy, something that we try to utilize to help you get there. Because a lot of times people will say, I don't know what my core need is here. I just know we're fighting.
Yeah.
Is to really explore with your partner. Well, okay, we disagree. You want to send your kid to our kid to this school. I want to send my kid to this school. What is it that's so important to you about that school?
Yeah.
And get them talking about why it's important. Well, I always thought my kid would go to that school. It's where I went to school and I had such a good time there and it was a really good education. And being able to then pull from that. So I hear it's really important to you that our child goes to a school that feels fun and that has a really, really good education.
Yeah.
So those are two really important things. And then the other person being able to say, well, it's important to me that they go here because it's closer. I won't have to drive as far.
Yeah.
It's not going to cause problems in the morning. And then being able to say, so I can hear your core need is like not having to be chaotic and rushed in the morning. Where
Yeah.
can we find something an agreement that meets both? And it might be they're going to go to this school, but I'll drive them. That way you don't have to do it. But
Yeah.
really trying to ask why it's important because we get stuck here too often where we just talk about the problem and
Yeah.
not about what the person actually cares about within that problem.
Yeah. So is it like if I guess they create a list of, okay, this is something that I'm flexible on, this is something that I'm not flexible on, and then it just kind of,
Totally.
yeah. To me, I think it just kind of move
You
on.
know about Gottman stuff too?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, I do. But I found that works great.
It does. Yeah. So exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
You can sit down together and say, these are things that I am not flexible on at all.
Yeah.
These are things I would be willing to move on. And kind of remembering your inflexible list is usually smaller than your flexible list.
Yeah.
If it's
Mhm.
reversed, you might be being a little stubborn.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
And then seeing where you agree. So a lot of times you'll be like, "Oh, wow, we both agree. We're inflexible on our kid going to a bad school." Like that
Mhm.
we just aren't going to send them to a bad school.
Yeah.
But we are flexible on how they get there, where it's located, all of those types of things. So,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And that's one of the things that Gottman teaches is to meet.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I guess you hear about couples, they say that they go from being in love with their partner to just loving their partner.
Yeah.
The difference between those two is it's very staggering when you say that you were once in love with a person, but now you just love that person.
Yeah, and that would
So,
kind of feel like rejection too, right? Like,
yes, yes. So that's to me. I think that's what that would feel like. But what do you think that like would be some of those common catalysts to where a person would just go from, oh, I'm totally in love with this person to be, okay, I just love it. Like, what do you think that some of those would be?
I think some of it is that we do have that honeymoon stage
Yeah,
where lots of hormones are being pumped.
yeah,
And then when that stage moves on, you're not going to be that way forever. There
yeah,
can be a feeling where you start to wonder, like, are we still in love with each other? It doesn't feel the same. So I think that's one catalyst.
yeah,
I think another is what you mentioned earlier, which is that stressful things, roadblocks happen, you said.
yeah,
And couples either navigate them well or they don't. And when they don't navigate them well, really through just because they're just human beings and they're dealing with stress in their own way,
yeah,
um, when they don't navigate them well, they start to have what's called a distance and isolation cascade, which
Yeah.
means that one thing goes wrong, they start to distance. The
Yeah.
next thing goes wrong, they distance more. The next
Yeah.
thing goes wrong, they distance more.
Yeah.
And so they have love for each other. They don't want anything bad to happen, but they don't have intimacy
Yeah.
because they're not close.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right about like the way that I guess that particular aspect of it works. I think that also goes to I guess affection to a certain extent. Like how affectionate are you with your partner to a certain extent on a daily basis? Because I think that some or most people do respond to physical touch or words of affirmation or just any number of those things. But I guess to a certain extent, when you have lack of that, do
Yeah.
you think that that could actually just cause like a relationship to kind of drift too, right?
Absolutely. Affection, physical and verbal, is
Yeah.
an incredibly important part of a relationship. It's what makes it feel like a romantic relationship, right? It keeps it
Yeah.
special. And if we don't hear why our partner likes us, or
Yeah.
if we're not touched in a way that makes us feel like they like us,
Yeah.
then it is a rejection, and again, it goes into that distance cascade where it's like, "Well, if you're not saying nice things to me, I'm not gonna say nice things to you."
Yeah.
Or, "I tried to hug you yesterday, you didn't hug me back, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna try it again."
Yeah.
And so each person starts making themselves vulnerable less and less and less, and they aren't offering each other affection. If you notice that's happening, it's so important to say, okay, I see what's happened here. I'm not going to go along with this cascade. I'm going to have a willingness to offer the affection. And if I get rejected, I'll sit with that and I'm going to figure out what that means. But I'm not going to sit in this pattern of they're not offering it to me, so I'm not going to offer it to them. Or I'll offer it to them when they do this. Someone has to be willing to just start.
Yeah. Yeah. So even I guess in some relationships or where you have those areas where affection is, I guess, not present at all,
Yeah.
is that like a severe deal breaker to a certain extent where there's like no affection at all, or do you think that everybody has their own, I guess, set of deal breakers to a certain extent?
I think the second one.
Okay.
I think that for me, it would be a deal breaker,
Okay.
but different things work for different people. The thing wouldn't be if there's no physical affection, it's a deal breaker. It would more be what's the meaning behind that?
Yeah.
Is there no physical affection and are you truly okay with it? Like,
Yeah.
are you tolerating it? Or are you actually okay with it?
Yeah.
Um, or are you not okay with it? And do we need to figure out how to get some affection to be within this relationship?
Yeah.
I've had many clients who have been married for, let's say, 30 years, and they're not super affectionate. And they say it is sad that we're not affectionate, but it's not a deal breaker because I like our life. I like that we parent together. I like that we have a business together. Like there's all these other partnership activities.
Yeah.
Um, and they truly feel at peace with it. Now, I've worked with other people who are like, no, it's heartbreaking to me. I want to be touched in my marriage. I want to be in a relationship where we're hugging. And then we have to work through like what does that mean for next steps?
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, I've seen that, like what you just described. So I've
You
seen
have?
that too. Yeah, I've seen that too. And to me, I encourage people to, I guess, have a proactive marriage.
I like that.
And that's something that I really just kind of preach to people is, especially like if you've been married 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, however long you've been married, just kind of practicing a proactive mindset. which is always are kind of working on your marriage to a certain extent, always working on like the little small issues so that they don't turn into big issues. And then you're always working on love. Because I think that sometimes when in marriage, love has to be worked on just like a job. Like just like a job, you have to work on cultivating love. And the
Yes.
longer you're with a person, that does not mean that that same love that you had for that person 5 years ago is going to be that same love that is going to still exist 15 years like later. You have
Right.
to kind of consistently build and work and continue to, I guess, court your mate.
Yes. And woo them. And I think as you were talking, I was thinking you also have to be okay with things changing.
Mhm.
I think people can get really caught up in it doesn't feel how it felt before. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel how it felt before we had babies. It doesn't feel how it felt when we were dating. It doesn't. And instead, you have to look at it as it's like an evolving organism. I mean, it changes. It's not always going to feel the same.
Mhm.
There actually might be periods where it feels quite boring, and there might be periods where it feels like puppy dog love again.
Mhm.
But you have to be willing to nurture it as you would nurture anything that grows.
Mhm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I push too, because I mean, yeah, I think that your marriage can be whatever you want it to look like whatever you want it to be. So if you want your marriage to be exciting, it can be exciting. You just have to kind of work together and actually get it there.
What do
So,
you what do you do when one person really wants to do that work and the other person doesn't?
well, for me, it's self discovery. So basically, we lay out the idea of what one party wants to do, and then we kind of gauge why the other person necessarily does not want to kind of interact in that way with their partner. And then it's just like everything else, common ground, finding what that compromise would kind of look like. Because if you're married, if you're in a marriage situation, there's no such thing as one party wants to do something and the other party doesn't want to do it, because that's not
Right,
marriage. That's like being single to a certain
right,
extent.
right.
So that means that there has to be like some type of common ground there. So that's usually what I do, is find out what the actual topic is as far as like what do a couple want to try, and then we build towards that topic, which is figuring out how we can get there. Like
Yeah,
what can we do to kind of take steps to actually get there on both sides.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and, like, the finding common ground is so important. I think it's something I have to talk a lot, with people about is that, like, the way you want this to look can't be the only way that we conceive of this. Like, it has to be a space in the middle ground where
mhm.
each of you is seen in this relationship,
Yeah.
and where both of your needs are being honored. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'm sure you see this, but
Mhm.
couples get really rigid in, I want this, I want my need to be met, I want this, and I'm only going to be happy if it's this. And they cannot move and integrate with each other
Yeah.
when they're only focused on winning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen that too. And most times when I've kind of seen that is, one person is the alpha, the other person is the beta. Or then again, you might have two alphas in the same relationship. And then it's like, okay,
I
like
get that. I get lots of clients that are two alphas.
yeah, then you might have that too. But my whole process to like helping couples with that is I tell people direct. I'm very direct when I help couples, and I tell them, hey, nobody's winning here.
Yep.
Like
Nobody's winning here. You're both losers.
exactly, exactly. Especially when you're married, nobody's winning, because
Yeah.
if one person loses, you lose too. Like you're the person that's gonna lose too, because you're connected.
Yes. Yes. I'm like, look, you're going to win here, but the more your partner loses, the more resentment gets built. And as resentment builds, then what happens is that certain things happen that make you lose, whether it's that the resentment pulls your partner away from you, or your partner ends up stepping out of the marriage because they resent you, or whatever it is. But if you're not really working on creating space for both people and you're getting this exactly how you want it, and the other person is just kind of doing it to make you happy, it's not a long-term win. It's just a band-aid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right, because there's no such thing as, like I said, both parties winning at the same time
Right.
without some type of compromise and communication and just working together.
Right. Right.
And and that's the biggest thing. So when it comes to like friends and family and how they have an effect on a marriage or relationship, it's very hard for a couple to kind of navigate that, because I think to a certain extent, everyone's so close to their family and so close to their friends that they respect their opinion and all of these things. But how can friends and family really like affect a marriage?
They can have a big impact, positive or negative, right? And so they can have a positive impact by trying not to like feed
Mhm.
into gossip about the partner or pulling the other partner away.
Yeah.
But the way that they can have a negative impact is Shirley Glass talks about windows and walls. I don't know if you've ever read Shirley Glass before, but
Mhm.
it's one of my favorite metaphors.
Okay.
And a healthy couple lives inside of a house, right? And their windows and the walls are outside of them and they're inside together. And together they kind of decide when they open the door, when they open the window, and they'll have a healthy flow of information out and in, which means that they might share with a trusted friend if there's stress or struggle, but they're not sharing with everybody. Um, and when the friend gives feedback, they're not triangulating. So they're not getting involved. They're giving feedback to help their friend go back into their relationship. So they're saying, that sounds really hard. Have you thought about talking to your partner about X, Y, and Z? Well, let me know how that goes. But kind of returning them back into the house and saying, here you go. Unless, of course, there's something really destructive going on, then of course a friend needs to say, no, that's not healthy, get out of there.
Yeah.
When couples become distant, what happens is that the walls are reversed and they're no longer outside, but they're between.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a couple sitting against the wall with their backs to each other and the walls between them. And
Yeah.
all of the information and energy is going everywhere else. It's going to work or to hobbies or to friendships. And you're being influenced by everybody about your relationship, but it's never returned back
Yeah.
because there's a wall between the two of you. So it's super important to consider, how much am I sharing with people? Am I sharing it to help me in my relationship? Or am I sharing it to demean my partner, to make my partner look bad, and to actually do things that take me out of the relationship?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
So
that kind of along the lines of what you would say too, or what would you say?
yeah, it's a little different from what I would say, because to me, I believe with marriage, it's you and your partner.
Yes,
And basically, when marriage operates like that, when it's you and your partner, it's pretty much you get married, they leave their family, you leave your family, and then you marry that one person. And sometimes that dynamic gets a little bit different when family and friends get involved,
mhm.
because family and friends don't have a ring.
Yep,
Like they don't get a ring. Like it's only the other person that get the ring. So it's like it's kind of hard for you to not do live in both worlds to a certain extent,
totally.
especially when you're married like that. So for me, I think that the best way to actually navigate family and friends while being married is to have that constant communication with your partner.
Yeah,
So
and making sure that you're doing a lot of we talk,
yeah.
right? Like, we've
Mhm.
decided that we're doing this.
Yes.
Um, and I was talking more about, like, what happens when you need to talk to somebody, you need counsel or something,
Yeah.
make sure you're not talking too much with everybody. But
Yeah.
when you're making decisions, let's say about what you're going to do with holidays,
Yeah.
or are you going to baptize your kid or not,
Yeah.
those need to be decisions as a we.
Yeah.
And you have to use the word we. You can't throw the other person under the bus and
No.
say, Liz is the one that decided that we're not going to baptize. It has to
Yeah.
be, we've decided this together. We're not going to come this year. We've decided we're not going to give any more money to X, Y, and Z because we can't. And you really have to have a united front.
Yeah, and you do, and that's kind of what I was explaining.
Yeah,
That even when it comes to like asking like counsel or like getting advice from like friends or family, I think that's a conversation that you need to kind of at least let your partner know about, because if you think about it though, if that information like gets back to them to a certain extent,
absolutely. It's a
they might
betrayal.
feel they might feel alienated, like depending on what that conversation was, because there might be something that they're not comfortable with, like sharing with
Absolutely.
everybody
And
else.
if you are talking about your relationship with anyone other than a therapist, you have to make sure you're not sharing information that's not yours to share.
Yeah,
Like, it's not okay to tell your friends about a secret that your partner has told you, something that's been told in confidence. And in fact, that's another form of betrayal, is
yeah,
if your partner hears that you've said mean things about them, that you've shared secrets, that you've shared private information. Um, so making sure you're speaking for yourself and that you let your partner know you had the conversation. I talked to my mom earlier because I don't know what to do about this.
yeah,
And, you know, these are some things that I shared. I just shared that I'm stressed. I shared that I'm upset. Um, but I wanted to let you know because that's how you make sure your partner doesn't feel betrayed.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I would think about that too. Okay, so I actually encourage people before they consider doing that, right? Before, not after, because
Yeah,
I do
I like
I encourage people to do it before, because I was saying a lot of time with men in general have egos to a certain extent when it comes to information being shared to whom.
yeah,
And sometimes you don't, sometimes as men, we don't say that we're hurt by a situation, but we actually are hurt by
by
that
the
situation.
situation.
We just don't necessarily talk about
Well, you also have to make sure that it's a person that isn't hurtful to your partner.
it. Mm-hmm.
Like in my marriage, my husband loves my mom.
Yeah.
So he would never care if I talked to my mom because
Yeah.
we've already navigated that, right? Like we
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
I don't mind if he talks to his brother because
Yeah.
I love his brother. But
Yeah.
there's certain people that I know actually it would really hurt my partner
Yeah.
if I talk to them. And I
Yeah.
also think this is where it's important that you understand like love maps and
Yeah.
like who am I actually caring about my partner in this interaction that I'm having? Like,
Yeah.
or am I betraying them? Like, am I talking? We share a lot of friends, right?
Yeah.
So he's friends with the husbands, I'm friends with the wives.
Yeah.
I would never talk to the wives about anything personal about us
Yeah.
because that would be such a betrayal. And I
Yeah.
know my husband enough to know that.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to really be concerned about like what would hurt this person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not
Mm-hmm.
just about talking, it's also about where is energy spent,
Yeah.
right? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is it gonna do to my partner if I'm spending every night at the office, or if I'm spending every evening on video games,
Yeah.
or if I'm putting all of my energy into my soccer group? Like, the energy needs to be in your relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're definitely right about that. You're definitely right about that. It's about having that constant idea that your partner's views, their feelings, their emotions, how they feel about certain things. You always keep that in mind in any interaction that you're having. So
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. You have to keep them in mind.
yeah. So COVID-19
Mm.
and how it affects the landscape of relationships. So I know that I guess with everything going on this year, the landscape of relationships has changed too, and how people interact with their partners.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that you've seen a lot of different um, things that's been happening over the years as far as like with couples and their dynamics in general.
Yeah.
So what is like that one or two things that advice that you give like couples like going through like quarantine with each other and things like that to kind of get through it?
Yeah. So one is that obviously there's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And um, I think it was Robert Levinson did studies a while ago that showed that couples that can manage stress together well are able to stay together, right? They're able to get through the stress and keep the relationship over the long term. Couples that can't navigate outside stress very well struggle. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much stress, there's so much outside stress right now,
Yeah.
let alone inside stress, anything you were experiencing before. But there's the stress of, like before we started today, what are we going to do for the holidays?
Yeah.
How do we engage with COVID? What do we think about the elections? Are we engaging with protests or not engaging with protests? Like, there's all of this stuff in the outside world that comes in. And both people at the exact same time are feeling stress, which is unique. Usually, there's one person feeling outside stress and the other person has a little bit more resources,
Yeah.
right? So my husband might be having a terrible time at work and I have a few more resources that week to be like, okay, I can listen to it.
Yeah.
But now everyone's having a terrible time at work.
Yeah.
Everyone's having a terrible time with what's going on with COVID. Everyone is. So you have two people living together, both of whom are feeling really, really stressed and are under-resourced. And what I would encourage is figuring out together, how do we want to manage the outside stress in our home? Does that mean that we put rules around when we talk about it? Do we say, hey, when there's stress, there's stuff you're stressed about outside, can you please hold that until the end of the workday? Because I can't be hearing about like the COVID cases again at 8 a.m. while I'm trying to like get ready for my first session of the day.
Right.
Is it finding ways that you can empathize with your partner again? I think a lot of people have lost empathy for each other. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. In some cases, yeah.
yeah, and I think I get it, right? Like couples are like, I'm so stressed because I'm dealing with this all day with the kid, and the other person saying, I'm so stressed because my business is failing. And neither are able to say, that sounds really hard for you. They're kind of saying, well, I have trouble too, right?
Yeah.
And being able to actually listen to your partner's stress, even though I know it's hard, um, can be incredibly powerful in terms of knowing each other and also feeling soothed by the
Yeah.
other person.
Yeah.
So to me, that's like one of the most important things right now
Yeah.
is how are you seeing it's us against the stress, not
Yeah.
you and me against each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What
So
about you? What are you telling people? What do you
I
think is
would
really important right now for couples?
I would just say checking in, like constant checking in with the other person, with your partner, and then constantly checking in with yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I've been kind of encouraging people to do, especially like just checking in with yourself, making sure that you're processing things well as far as like your day, and then checking in with your partner to just kind of check on them and just showing them that, like you were saying, empathy and then that compassion too,
Yeah.
because it's important for them, especially depending on what they do, is support, letting them know that, hey, I'm thinking about them, or you just kind of checking on them, seeing how they're doing. So just mutually doing that is pretty much what I've been encouraging people to do, because that gets you through a lot of stuff, knowing that you're
And just
not going
knowing
through
you
that.
have like a secure base,
Yeah,
like this person cares about me even as the world is falling apart. Like we
yeah,
have each other.
there you go. There you go. So last question. So when it comes to you being the best version of yourself on a daily basis, what motivates you to be the best version of yourself every day?
Such a good question. I think probably a few things. One is definitely my family, my son and my husband. So, um, I really do every day try to reflect, like, what do I think I did well with today?
Yeah.
And what are some areas that maybe I wasn't the best version of myself?
Yeah.
And I try to gain insight around that, right? Like, what was that about me that got so frustrated and stomped out of the room?
Yeah.
And what could I do in the future to try to like negotiate that in a different way? Because to me, all of the things that I think about relationships and I help people through relationships, like I want to live that. I
Yeah.
don't want to just like be a couples therapist and tell
Yeah.
people what they should do.
Yeah.
I don't want to just talk about relationships. Like I really have an intention every day. I'm going to be better at relationships today.
Yeah.
And that helps me to figure out how to be a better version of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's perfect. That's definitely perfect. And I think that to a point, I think that as I guess would you say healthcare providers, I think that's always our task is making sure that we're pushing ourselves so that we can give our patients, our clients, the best versions that they deserve. So
Yeah. And we can say we know it works, right?
yeah.
It's really, really, really hard. And sometimes it feels terrible. Uh,
Yeah.
but if you do the work, you do see change and it works.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely does. So I wanted to thank you, Liz, Dr. Liz, for actually joining the conversation on life and relationships with me. And
Thank you for having me. It was so nice to chat with you.
yes, it was. I definitely enjoyed the conversation. And like I said, one day